Hello, welcome to another episode of Microsoft Azure Community User Group. I'm Nicholas, and I'll be your host today. So this evening we have two major speakers, Milk and Wim, but Wim is working running a bit late. So before we start, let's just do some housekeeping. So hope that everyone having a good day so far, good week so far. Let me just share my screen. Can you see this? One sec. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Welcome. So I just want to go through some housekeeping. So the code of conduct. All members of this group should abide by this code of conduct. Be friendly and welcoming to everyone. Be patient. Be thoughtful. Be respectful, inclusive. Be open to be open and curious. Always try to ask questions to one another, like to the speaker, and try to understand and not to criticize each other. Yep. So I mentioned today's theme is going to be development stack and Agile update manager. So Mick is going first. Mick van Dijk and CTO Griffey. It's Dutch name, and he's talking about you're doing a session on development stack, begin guide to seamless deployment. So it'll be interesting if you're not for those who don't know what development stack is. And Wayne Matthews is can't pronounce his name, surname is Agile Technical Advisor at Prosmexios and Microsoft MVP and MCT. And you're doing a session on Behind the Patch, deep dive into Agile Update Manager. And the next event is in next month, but it's not been confirmed yet. So let's bring Mick on. Let me just remove mine. Hello.
Hi, Nicholas.
Hiya.
Hi. Everything going okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks.
Cool.
So you doing a section on a development stack. Is it bicep by any chance?
Yeah, I have some bicep in there, but you can do it with Terraform as well. But
Okay.
I'm just more into bicep, so
Okay, no
will be a
worries.
lot more bicep. But I would really love you to try my name again. Just
How about
it's hard, right?
Mick
Dutch name.
Bandit girl? Sorry,
Yeah, mine was also completely.
sorry. I
It's
can't.
not that difficult,
Wait,
Nicholas.
I can't
Yeah.
pronounce.
It's almost, you can say medicine in English.
Maths
easier to
teachers.
pronounce it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not that easy for English speaking
Yeah.
people to pronounce our names correctly, I think.
Yeah, I tried get Sorry to pronounce it before, and then
No,
it
no worries.
said it
It's
correctly.
fine for me.
Yeah.
As
So
long as my first name is almost okay, it's fine.
yes, it's so good. Okay, so do you want to describe what the session's about before we dive in, Mick?
Yeah, of course. Basically, this session is about getting started in some point with deployment stacks, which is quite a new functionality. Basically, created about a year ago or released about a year ago.
Yeah.
And it brings you a lot of new something against configuration drift.
Okay. Yeah, this reminds me of the bicep configuration deployment stack. That's why I asked if it's bicep or Terraform. Or you say you can do it with both.
Yeah, you can do both because it's just an Azure feature. So if you
Yeah.
could use the AZ API components in Terraform, you can also do deployment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Yep. So the flow is here. So take as much as you want, and we can ask. I will leave. So any question we just pop up to you, or we to join the end as normal.
Yeah, okay, that's fine by me. So let's just get started then. So, welcome to my session about deployment stacks, a beginner's guide to seamless deployment. So first, a small introduction about myself. So I'm going to say my name completely in Dutch, Maik van der Gaag. So that's why it's really hard for people from the UK to just the G it's really hard for them as well. I'm a Microsoft Azure MVP. I'm specialized in the infrastructure as code components. And I work for a company called 350 in the Netherlands. Since a few months now, we are also part of the Data Balance Group in the Netherlands, where we do a lot of consultancy around Azure and Microsoft, but also do managed services around these components. Next to that, I'm still also a Microsoft certified trainer, so I do a lot of training components as well. But to get started and basically look at why we are here today is starting to learn about deployment stacks. And basically, using deployment stacks for me is moving from unmanaged resources, and we will get later on into the unmanaged part, to managed resources. Because if you deploy resources to the Azure platform, they are just deployed and basically capable for everyone to see, depending on the role-based access control, of course, and also to able to alter those resources as well. And in some situations, you want to make sure that basically no configuration drift happens within your environment. But basically, that's why I call it moving from unmanaged to managed resources. But there's also something else. When you talk to different people within Microsoft, they really also tell you that this is the next gen Azure deployments. So basically, when looking at deployments and doing deployments to Azure, this is something to look at and to start with as well, because it's really important, and I hope to see after that this session that you can really see the benefits of this. So I see in the chat you guys hear my cat, right? Yeah, sorry to
You want to take part? He and she want to take
yeah,
part.
it's a baby kitten, and
Okay.
she was helped yesterday, so she's really terrible since today. So I hope you guys don't mind that much, and that she doesn't
That's fine.
as much as she does. So just upfront, many of my samples that I will give you later on during the demonstration are with the Azure CLI, but of course there's also capabilities within the Azure PowerShell module, so you can use that as well. But first, let's basically look at an example. So basically, if you look at deployment stack and the scoping within Microsoft Azure, and I think everyone already knows which scopes we have within Azure. So we have resources, we have resource groups. On top of that, we have subscriptions, and on top of that, we have management groups. And if we look at the problems we have with deploying resources on different scopes, is that basically it's not really easy to do deny assignments on top of multiple scopes or even on a single scope. It's also hard to maintain a life cycle of a set of resources. So, for example, if you span multiple resources within multiple resource groups, it's really hard to maintain that life cycle at that point as well. And also the cleanup can be very time consuming when not using deployment stacks. But if we look at deployment stacks and how we can use them, we can use the deployment stacks on, for example, a resource group, where we just contain every resource that we have in that specific resource group in a deployment stack. But we can also scope that to, for example, a subscription, moving it on top of multiple resource groups and manage that completely as a whole. So you could say that we have, for example, a web application where in one resource group we have the Azure App Service, and in one resource group we have the SQL databases, because we want them separate, because we have different people managing those components. And basically separating them in resource groups and then moving them all together into a deployment stack, making it really easy to maintain those resources. But what you could also have is basically move it on top of subscriptions. So if you have specific data subscriptions or specific automation subscriptions where you have the differentiation between resource groups, you can also move those deployment stacks on top of those as well. Really making sure that on multiple layers within the Azure platform, you can really keep managing your resources. So, but why do you then want to use those deployment stacks if we already have the deployment capabilities? So basically, like I've mentioned before, it really simplifies the provisioning across different scopes, but maintaining all the resources as one. You will be able to do deny settings, making sure that we can deny specific actions and specific roles on my resources. We will get back to that later on. It also has a fast cleanup. So what's the fast cleanup in this example? So normally when you delete resources, resources are deleted one by one. By using deployment stacks, you have the bulk deletion option. So basically, all the resources in the stack are sent to the bulk delete API so that they are deleted much faster than you would normally have in doing resource by resource. And basically, the last part is that it really is no different than you already do now and do know already, because it's almost completely the same, and you will see that later on in one of the demonstrations as well. So also, what keep in mind, what's really important, basically, when you're doing the deployment stacks and running it with infrastructure as code, you make sure that the code you are using is prescriptive, is declarative. So you're really declaring the specific state of your components. And one other important thing to notice is that when using deployment stacks, you need to make sure that everything in the stack is direct child scoped from your stack. So if you're moving from a specific management group, you need to make sure that the subscription is a direct child scope of that specific management group if you go that route as well. So like I've mentioned, if you have a deployment stack and you have everything stacked into that one deployment stack and you want to get rid of that stack, there are different options to remove everything. So basically you could do a delete of specific resources, you can do a delete of resource groups, you could also do a delete all. So for example, if you have a management group stack of resources, you could even do a deletion of a subscription, for example, and also a deletion of the resource groups and also deletion of the resources. So it really depends on the situations, how you want to move forward and what happens with your resources. And this gets clear a lot more when we move to the demonstrations. I first want to go over the options that you have on those stacks as well with you guys. Like I've mentioned, you have deny settings. So it's more or less looks a little bit the same as the deny the logs you have on resources. So you have a deny delete option on those resources, and you also have a denied write and delete. Meaning that if you deploy a stack with specific resources, you can really configure it to do a deny, write, and delete on those stacks and on those resources, making sure that nobody is able to change everything on those resources. So no configuration changes and not deleting any objects as well. But what you also need to remember is that everything about deployment stacks is on top of the control plane and not on the data plane. So for example, if you look at a storage account, and in the storage account you have a blob, and if we set the configuration on the stack to deny, write, and delete, you are not able to delete the storage account, but you are able to delete the blob, for example, because that's on the data plane and not anymore on the control plane. So you need to be aware of that as well. And what's cool with the deny settings is that you also have exclusions, making sure that you can exclude specific roles, principles, or specific actions from the deny settings, making it very easy to maintain your resources and also make sure that there's no real configuration drift going on. So you can imagine a situation where we deploy a stack with deny, write, and delete, making sure that nobody in the organization is able to change anything about my infrastructure. But in this example, we could exclude a specific principle. So we could exclude the principle of the deployment, making sure that we can do additional deployments on that specific stack, but deny everyone else to do configuration changes. Really making sure that there's no configuration drift on your environment and on your resources, and you can only do your deployments via the service principles. But for example, you could also do that on specific actions. So those are really the specific actions on, for example, writing to a storage account or setting secrets in a key vault. You can also exclude those, really to make it really handy and incorporate into your situation as well. So that brings me basically to the demo time, and the largest part of my presentation is completely into demos. So
I've got a question. Sorry, I've got a question by someone.
Yeah.
So someone for Zari asked, sorry, I pronounced it wrong. Is this idea similar to Unity catalog in Azure Databricks, essential place to control accesses to assets? So
I'm not an Azure Databricks guru, so not completely sure. But it doesn't not only have to do with access to a specific container or anything else. It's really about managing something completely together, and also having the capabilities of role-based access control and everything else. So I think it will get more clear when you see it in action. So let's do it in action, or do you have an additional question, Nicholas?
no, I think that's it. Thanks.
Okay, so let's move to the action. I hope then Zachariah gets the point and maybe sees the differences or maybe the comparison as well with Databricks. So I have my examples in Bicep. So what you can see here is just a clean, simple Bicep file, basically with nothing in it. So we can move. Let me check if I still have one. No. So we can, for example, move a storage account in here. Let me just type it directly. For some reason, I removed it. Storage accounts. Required properties. So let's give it a name. SD Azure demonstration. Location. Let's give it. Oh, West Europe. Oh. Just do a storage v2. Just make sure that it works. And why are you marking about my location? Resource location. Should not be hard coded. Yeah. Okay, let's do it this way. Resource dot location. Yeah, and then I need to have a parameter. Yeah, let's just move ahead with going to the deployment stacks. So what you can see here in my code, let me just zoom in a little bit. So on top of that, in row 1, I just do a set subscription, really making sure that I are in the correct scope to deploy my deployment stack. And next on line 3, I do an AG group create just to make sure that we have a resource group. And basically the fun start on line 5, where we do an AG stack group create, and then basically give the stack a specific name. We point it to a specific resource group because that's the scope we are deploying it to. We point it to a Bicep file. We also point it to a parameter file, and we do an action on manage delete all and a deny settings mode to none. Really making sure that everything is corporate and working. So let's fix the error on the Bicep because that's we'll sing along because I have a Bicep config going on in here as well, just to make sure that we don't have any problems. And this should be fix it. Yeah. So if we would run the line to create a resource group first, of course, because we need a resource group in Azure. That's one is created now. And then also create the specific stack. And like I've mentioned in why you should use deployment stacks, is that it's really no difference than doing an AZ deployment. Because normally if you would do an AZ, a regular deployment to the Azure platform, the only difference that you have is basically to do AZ deployment group create instead of an AZ stack group create. Basically remove these parameters and you have exactly the same idea. So basically it's very easy to get started with and run those specific things on your Azure environment. So if we would now go to the specific subscription in Azure, it should be this one. Look at the resource groups. We should have RG stack 01, which is my resource group. And we can see that it's one deploying in here. So this is basically deploying, and we can also see the deployment stacks itself as well. And you can see that we now here have a specific stack demo introduction. And in that specific stack, we also have a specific resource group. So basically this is the deployment stacks. So you can see here that you have some additional capabilities within the Azure platform. You might have already noticed it when browsing along. You have that option in the left menu where you see the specific stacks. And in the stacks, you can see the complete managed resources itself as well. In this, you can also see the specific deployment. So this basically points to the deployment you are doing with the stack. But you could also see, for example, the stack if we look at the deny settings. So for example, if I would have deny settings, I see them included in here as well. And I also see the other stuff like the properties. So you can have more aligned properties. You have the deny settings, debug mode, and action on unmanaged. So for example, what you see here is an action on unmanaged. Means that for some reason, if I would delete the storage account from my bicep file, and then I also need to remove this location, and I would do an additional deployment. Basically, it is now telling Azure that, and that's also why I now also get the question. So it's telling me that, hey, there could be a change in your bicep file, and this could impact something on Azure. So basically, it could be a deletion of resources, resource groups, management groups as well. So in this example, I would just select yes, or sure you want to continue. And this basically starts a new deployment on the Azure platform. And it should be picking up here. Yeah, it's running now. And we should also see the state change at this component as well. So we see that it's gone. You see the status is initializing. You see it's deploying. It also says that it's deleting resources now. And if it's done, you should also see something else in this screen as well. If Azure hurries up a little bit today. No, it's still deleting. Okay, so let's just wait another 10 seconds. Otherwise, we'll just move forward to the next demonstration just to make sure that we don't lose too much time. Damn, it's too slow today. Okay, let's just check the resource group if its storage account is gone. Storage account is gone, so it should be ready. No, still deleting. Okay, so let's just move on for a little bit. So I can show you that next to that as well. So basically what you have seen here is just a regular deployment stack on a resource group. That's basically more or less the same what you do with deploying your stacks. Basically, the next demonstration is a subscription scope stack. But first, I saw that it's popped up ready. So if we refresh this, we can also see that it's now deleted one specific storage account. So you also have some kind of action track on what happened on your specific stack and what you're doing. So let's move on to the next demonstration where we more or less have a subscription scope stack. So what you can see here is that I have another bicep file that's basically scoped very different because it has a different target scope. In this example, we have it a target scope subscription. We let this bicep file create two resource groups. So I have resource group 1 and resource group 2. And we have a specific storage account, which comes from a module that we deploy to resource group 2. So if we would go to the specific code, we can see that it's not very different than the other one. So basically, instead of a group create, we do a sub create. We give it a name, point it to the parameters, and we specify the action on delete. We would perform this one. We will see this other one creating as well. And you can also look at, and this example, if we just zoom in a little bit. Oh, let me just remove that loading sign. So, yeah. So you can see that on line 11, we have the specific location for the stack. On line 12, we set the deny settings mode. So this is basically now set to none, meaning that everything can be done on those specific resources. And basically the action on unmanaged is delete all, meaning that it will delete all resources that are in my stack if I delete them from the stack and from the bicep template file. So if you look at the part from line 17, it's basically the same comment, but we do something different. So basically on line 22, there's a little bit of difference. So there we have a deny settings mode, basically set to deny, write, and delete, meaning that I'm not able to do anything on my resources. So I'm not able to write and not able to delete anything. I also make sure that I set these deny settings to all the child scopes, but I also have a deny settings excluded actions. And the excluded actions in this example is Microsoft.storage accounts, blob services, containers, delete. So basically what this means is that deploying the stack with these settings, I will make sure that I'm unable to do anything on my storage account or on the resource group according to settings, but I'm still able to delete specific containers. So let's check if, okay, I'm not sure. Yeah, there it goes. Let's see. Yeah, the first stack deployed. And let me just check the bicep that we deploy containers. So we deploy containers as well. So if we would go to my Azure subscription, and then I will just do the following up comment as well, just to make sure that we have those deny settings in a little bit. We can see that we have deployed this specific deployment stacks. So the first demonstration, we moved from the scope resource group, where we went to deployment stacks on the resource group. And basically now, because we did subscription scope deployment of the stack, you need to go to the specific subscription, and then you also have the deployment stack section, where you can see that we have that stack demo subscription stack that's now deploying because we have triggered it again. And you see that it's now also updating deny assignments, because the first time we had no deny assignments, and we now do have these deny assignments. So on that subscription, we could also check if we have some specific resource groups. So if we go to the resource group, we should see that we have a demo 02 RG1, which is completely empty, just according to the bicep file, and we have RG2 with that specific storage account. And in this specific storage account, there should be 3 containers. So if we just check if the stack is ready deploying, yeah, it succeeded. What you can also see in this overview that we have a deny status. So we have changed the deny status from none to deny write and delete, making sure that I'm not able to do anything on that stack. So if I would go to that container, it asks me to log in again. And I would, so let me just go to the storage account and just give me some settings, configurations. Let's do something. Let's set this access key to disabled. It should deny me this, yeah. And you can see it as well. Failed to update storage account. The client has no permissions to perform the scope write on scope. So I'm not able to do anything on these configurations. But like we've said before, if we look at the deny settings, we have an excluded action on the storage account blob containers delete. So I should be able to delete a specific container. This is what I can do, and everything else I can't do. So you can really craft the deployment stack to your specific settings for your specific organizations. So even, for example, looking at landing zone implementations and landing zone deployments, you can make sure that you deploy hub-spoke networking configurations to specific subscriptions, place that in the deployment stack, and make sure that people are not able to touch it and change anything. Maybe only specific actions. Or for example, if you deploy a VM, you could say, okay, you have deny write delete, but you are able to start the VM, to stop the VM as well. So you can really tailor this to everything you would like as well. So next up, I hear you thinking, okay, I love the concept of doing deployment stacks and how that basically works. But we now have a lot of bicep files already in our environment. And let me just, during my talk, set this up as well. So like, as you can see here is I have an AZ deployment group create, stack migration, and that deploys to a specific resource group. And it basically deploys my storage account again, just like as it's easy. Let me fire this up. I think resource group is still there. So this is basically doing just a regular deployment, like you already know, an AZ deployment group create. There's not any difference as you're doing now. And basically, like you can imagine, is that you guys already have a lot of these deployments laying around or done through automatic pipelines and everything else. And you say to each other, yeah, okay, but this is a cool concept. Let's move our old deployments to the new way of working and say, okay, we want to have the stack option in our deployment. So making sure that we are not able to do anything. So that's very easy to do. So basically what you have seen me do now is just do a deployment to a specific resource group called MVRG unmanaged resources. And to show you as well, that specific resource group is in my subscription called MVRG unmanaged resources. And there's one storage account in here. And as you can see as well, no stacks. And moving to the new way of working is really easy. So as you can see here, the next comment coming from line 12 is just doing AZ stack group create. Basically pointing to the same name. It's pointing to the same resource group. It's pointing to the same bicep file, same parameter file. The only addition I've done now is that I have an action on managed, and I have a deny settings mode, and I have a deny settings excluded principal. So if I would perform this on the exact same thing, I'm really moving my unmanaged resources to managed resources as well. Because this deployment really doesn't do anything else than just creating the stack. Because it sees during the deployment that the storage account is already there on the subscription. It's already under that specific management group. It only creates that specific stack. So if we would refresh this screen, where we first did not have a stack, you can see that we now have a stack. You can see that we already have that specific storage account under the stack, because it's now also much faster than the first time without the stack settings. And we also have some specific deny settings, and we have a deny, write, and delete. And we also have a specific excluded principal. So you can see here that now I've excluded principals for the deny, write, and delete. Meaning that my user that I'm now using, because I'm user Maik, is not able to do anything on that stack. So basically on this subscription. So if I would go to the access control, I could check my access. Then it should also, oh no, I check a few my access. Sorry, clicked the wrong one. You should also see the deny assignments. So you can also see that I have a deny assignment created by deployment stack. So I'm not able to do anything on this because I'm an owner. And even if I'm an owner on that management group, I'm not able to do anything as well. And this is also a good thing to keep in mind as well. So what you are seeing now is that I have a deny assignment on my stack. Meaning that I, as an owner, am not able to do anything on my specific resource. But because I'm an owner of my subscription, I also have a way around it. Because I'm able to delete the stack as well, right? So even when deploying your specific stacks to specific scopes, you must always think about the fact that someone higher up in the tree of your scopes with a specific role, so for example, the owner role, is able to alter your stack. That's something to keep in mind, because I can deny that person specific actions on my resources, but I cannot deny that on my stack, making the stack really secure. So that's something you have to keep in mind, because when I would like to delete this stack, I just delete the stack. Delete the storage account and just delete the stack. But now if I would do something on the storage account, for example, I'm not able to do it as I have that deny assignment. But if I wanted to remove the storage account, I would just delete the stack. So I hope that resonates as well to everyone. And now you have seen that it's really easy to move from an unmanaged part of resources to a managed part of resources. So for the last demonstration, we have something called a management group scoped subscriptions, where we do more or less on specific subscriptions. So what you can see here is I have a monitoring group and that's placed on the monitoring subscription, and I have something on the application group, resource subscriptions. So I'm really moving my resources around from specific scopes in my Azure platform. You can also see that I'm pointing to specific resource groups in there as well. So if we would do that deployment, let me just set my subscription context right. And then you can also see one of the limitations that's still in here. If I'm not mistaken, it should be still in there. And then you can also see the difference between the comments that we did on a subscription and now on a management group. So you see that we now do an AC stack mg create, meaning that we are pointing to management groups. you have that specific name. We now do a -m, pointing it to a specific management group. So in this example, I'm pointing it to my management group called personal, pointing it to a template file, parameter file, and also doing, again, specific deployment. So I'm pointing the deployment to a specific subscription because that's required for the deployment. And I also do the deny settings mode. So if we would skip this, we can see that it's running. So now again, we are not going to look at it on a resource group. We're not going to look at it on a subscription. No, we are going to look at it from the management group scope. So meaning that we move to the management groups part and search for my personal management group. And again, we have an option called deployment stacks in here. You can see that it's already succeeded. And you can also see that it deploys a couple of resources. So it deployed resources on my MCT subscription, and it also deployed some on my sponsorship subscription. You can also see something else very different: inapplicable, 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 and a deny write and delete, deny write and delete. This is still one of the limitations that's currently in the deployment stacks overview. If you're scoping multiple subscriptions, the deny assignments does not really completely work at this point when using management groups. So that's really something you need to be aware of when using the deployment stacks. So if we go back to the slides, so stacks are GA, and there are just a few things that are very important. So basically, they are the new way of deploying resources to Azure. So I think it's very important to get acquaintance with this functionality and how it works, and how you can really scope it to the specific settings. And also, for example, make sure that there is no configuration drift. So we even already do that in production environments where we do deployment to resource groups or to subscriptions, where we just lock down everything except for our deployment principle, really making sure that we can read the resources but do not do anything on the configuration. So when there's an issue, when we need to place an hotfix or anything else, we always do that via our infrastructure scope pipelines. So basically the first thing to do is basically change your Azure CLI or PowerShell deployment scripts to deploy as a stack, just to get started, just to get acquainted and start moving things to stacks. It's really easy. The only things you need to be aware of now is that there are limitations. So basically there's no what if at this point. I don't think there were some changes lately, I think there as well, but it's not completely working. You do not have support for other providers. So for example, if you use the Bicep Graph provider or anything else or other resources, well, it will not work. The deny assignments does not support tags because the tags are really seen as a different kind of resource. So they do not get back into the specific deny assignments. So in some situation would like to deny changing of tags. And as I've showed you guys as well, the deny assignments are not supported on management group code deployments. So really be aware of that fact as well. So if you would like to get started and read up on some information as well, just make sure to look at the Azure Deployment Stacks GitHub site. So that's basically very easy, github.com/Azure/deployment stacks. There are already a lot of Learn modules around deployment stacks as well. And if you would like to go to the demonstrations I just give you, there are all on my personal GitHub space. So look them up. It's MSFT deployment stacks, and the organization is called Maik van der Gaag, of course, around my name. So that basically leaves me with thanking you for being here at looking at the session. So if you want to get in contact or want to get some information, these are my contact details, and I hope you guys enjoyed it.
I got some question here, Mike.
Mhm.
Is that the repo that you put in GitHub one? Is that all the resources that you put in that you used? Because someone was asking for the code.
Yeah, basically, if you go to my GitHub account, github.com/Mike van der Gaag, there are a lot of Bicep repos in there, and there's one repo called msft-deployment stacks, and that's basically the complete demonstration I just gave. So that's always synced to that specific location, and I also update it when there are some changes around deployment stacks.
Brilliant. The earlier Sakura asks if the resource is shared across two budgets, like storage account, can it be shared across two deployment stack?
Nope. No, because then we would also get problems with deleting and everything else,
Okay.
and unmanaged stuff there as well.
It's only good for isolation testing and
Yeah.
stuff. Okay, that makes sense. And you can't really have a deployment stack within a deployment stack.
No.
No.
No. I haven't tried it, but I'm not sure. I don't think that will even work. That should not be possible. Let's hope for it that it not be possible. You never know, right? Yeah.
But I'm curious, how come it takes a long time to delete before? Is there not a forced option to delete?
For the stacks.
Yeah, but before it's trying to delete storage account, but it couldn't delete. It takes a long time.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it took a long time. Normally, because it's normally very fast to delete everything.
Okay.
But sometimes Azure does not work well with demonstration, right? So that's
that's true.
You've seen that before as well. So I'm always in the fact of looking. Okay, well, I do live demonstrations. I always like to do live demonstrations because videos make me also feel so. Yeah, doing a sales pitch, right? I'm not here for the sales. I'm just showing what really happens with Azure, and it's sometimes slow. It sometimes doesn't work as well. So I should be live, in my opinion.
Live demos. Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot, Mick, for this deployment stack session.
No
Hope
problem.
everyone learns about Bicep deployment stack and how important it is, and what you can use and what you can't use.
Yeah. I hope you guys enjoyed it.
Yep. So next session, Ben is talking about Update Manager, the new Azure Update Manager.
The new one, huh?
Not
the old one. Azure Update Manager.
Too bad. I thought you were doing the old one.
Yeah, with the automation, it's still. I have some screenshots about it, but it's not working anymore. So.
Sorry, Mick, I got a last question. Can current resources in Azure Port be migrating to deployment stack?
Yeah, if you just like I showed you, if you have already have a deployment file, it's very easy. If you don't have that deployment file yet, you need to make sure that you have that specific deployment bicep file. So if you have, for example, done some ClickUps and created something, you just make sure that you place that what you have done in ClickUps in a bicep file, and then deployment via the stack method. Then you can migrate it in. So that you are not able to ClickUps your way into deployment stacks.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. When we showing us Azure Update Manager, it's quite cool because we use it at work and to shut down our VMs and stuff, servers.
So you can do the session.
An update. No, I didn't do it for we use it, but it's quite good.
I think still a lot of companies use it, especially the ones using hybrid. So I think we're all thinking of pushing everything to cloud. There are still quite a lot of companies still using stuff on premises, and even still using VMs in Azure. So it's quite useful to do it in a cloud way, in my opinion. And I need to deploy it at quite some customers, and I do a lot of talks about them. But last year, I also worked quite a lot with Azure Arc and everything around it. And that's where Azure Update Manager plays a big part also to foresee the updates in a managed way for all your stuff running in the cloud or in the hybrid cloud. And I already did quite a lot of talks about it also, so I can talk about it for 4 hours, I think, but I think I have 40 minutes, so that's not that much.
That's fine. We can
I even give trainings about it, so it's 40 minutes. It's a short one, but yeah, I will try to get it in 45 minutes or something.
Yeah, we can do some AMA so people can just ask you questions.
Yeah, they can.
Like...
Probably will find me on my LinkedIn or whatsoever, or on X, or people already seem to find me for everything related to AUM and ARC. So I would guess they will also find me via this way. So
yeah,
but it's nice. It's nice to answer questions because everybody deploys it in a different way, and everybody has another kind of environment, and other VMs and other stuff running. So it can be quite similar for quite a lot of companies, but you always have those special things running at your environment that will probably do something else than you expect it to do. So I see quite a lot of things in the real world, to be honest, related to it.
Really? Because I think we just normally have, like, sometimes it takes a long time to get updates on the machine and stuff.
If you don't configure it correctly, it can take a while. Yeah. But yeah, it can go fast. It depends on how you set it up and how you configure it, because everybody thinks it's just click, click up, just like Mike said. But if you want to do it correctly and completely managed and set up purely focusing on your environment, it will ask you some more steps than just click it away and then.
Yeah.
It's really a lot of stuff. Microsoft also explains Azure Arc is just click, deploy the agent, and you're good to go. But that's not the real story in the back. So I see a lot of stuff going wrong by doing it in that way, but I don't think I need to explain it to Mike and to you. So let's see where we get with this. Shall I share my screen, Nicholas?
Yeah, just share screen and put it up on the screen.
Let me see. I can present it. Share screen. I will go and select my second screen. Let me see. So normally you should have a full screen now. Yeah, there it is. Okay, let me see if I can jump in my slides. So I'm going to talk about behind the patch, and it's a fast deep dive into Azure Update Manager. What am I going to talk about? First of all, how it all began. It's a small intro in how we get from where it all started to Azure Update Manager version 2. Then I will explain how we do it in the Azure way, the updating. Of course, I will not forget to tell you something about everything on premises, because with using Azure Arc in combination with Azure Update Manager, you can do exactly the same things like you would configure it for your only Azure VMs. Doesn't depend if it's Windows or Linux. You can do the same thing for everything running on-prem, but I will also explain that one. And if I still have some time, Nicholas, like I said, I would dig a little bit deeper in something related to Azure Update Manager. It's the extended security updates for everybody still running Windows Server 2012 or 2012 R2 and even SQL 2012 and even 2014. And then the latest and the hottest thing they integrated with everything related to patching is Hot Patch. And probably I will have some time after my session to answer any of your questions, or in between the session. If Nicholas, if somebody pings, just ask a question.
Okay.
So, short introduction of myself. I think probably some people watching this or listening to this will already know me. But for those who don't, I'm Wim Matthijs. I live in Belgium, where I work as an Azure technical advisor and trainer for, I always say, a small telco, but it's one of the biggest in Belgium, Proximus Next. I'm also a proud board member of a Belgium user group called MC2MC, Microsoft Cloud and Client Management Community. So just like Nicholas organize online things with this community, we on a regular base organize live events every 6 weeks, where we also host 4 speakers who focus on Microsoft 365, Azure, hybrid cloud, and security. So also cover the Microsoft stack, but it's live events, mostly purely in Belgium. I'm also an MCT and a Microsoft Azure MVP. And if you have a question related to this session, or you want to ask something about Azure Arc, Azure Update Manager, or if anything related to it, you're always free to ping me on Twitter. I also have my own blog, and if you want, you can also connect on LinkedIn, or you can simply scan the QR code on the right bottom of the screen. So I always try to start my session with a small story. So this time I'm not going to talk about the Big Bang, how it all began, but like most stories, I will start with a long time ago in an on-premises data center far, far away. Let me click this away. So how did it all start? It all started with a small app. It was a first web app added to Windows 98, sorry. So for the older people, they probably worked with this client OS. For the younger people, you can still run it if you want on very old computers. But this way, the Windows Update web app was, I think, Microsoft's first try to give a web-based application that could do the Windows updating directly from inside the OS. So we're all now familiar with the Windows Update in Windows 10 and Windows 11. You can click on it and the updates start installing. Think of this, it's the grandfather of that same thing. So it all started in Windows 89. So that's quite a long time ago in an on-premises environment. But these days, despite all the fancy cloud stuff and the cloud-only environments, there are still a lot of customers and companies still running quite a lot of resources on premises in combination with resources in Azure or any other cloud. So they have a multi-cloud environment, or most of the companies in Belgium, and I think also in the Netherlands, still have something like a hybrid environment where they have a private cloud, everything that runs on premises or in a space in a data center they rent somewhere, but not something like Azure, just from a party. And then they combine it with stuff they're running into Azure or in AWS. So they're combining their private cloud with a public cloud, and we get the hybrid cloud. All those things are not that far away anymore and not that long ago, because it's for me, it's real-time stuff. So I think I see those environments all day. And what do most companies still use to do the updates on Windows servers, for example, or on their Linux servers? I think a lot of people will know WSUS, Windows Server Update Services. It's still there. Even in Windows Server 2025, you can still deploy it as a feature. So it's still deployable. Still, as I see it, a lot of my customers or people that I know still use it to foresee Windows updates and Linux updates on their server devices. But some time ago, 25th of September 2024, Microsoft announced that it will be deprecating Windows Server Update Service, which means it's still available to deploy and to use, but Microsoft won't invest in new features, new updates in this product. So you can still use it just like you were familiar with, just like before, but they won't bring out new stuff on top of it. So it will work, but despite that, it's maybe the moment and a starting point for Microsoft to say, maybe it's time you start looking at something else. Next to that, probably a lot of people, especially people focusing on client devices, will know Configuration Manager. Configuration Manager also had Windows WSUS inside. So what do I also see at some companies I work with? They're using Configuration Manager not only to do the updates on client OSs, but also do the updates on server OSs. So it's a combination. Despite that, Configuration Manager switched for the client purpose most of the time to Intune. So a complete different way to update the client devices. And what did I see at the customers? All client devices are updated, all their Windows 11s and even Windows 10s are updated through Intune, but the servers are still updated to Configuration Manager, and the people managing Configuration Manager will only manage the Intune stuff, and they will leave the server updating to the server team, and they're not that familiar with Configuration Manager. So in a way, and that's how Microsoft also sees these days, it's time to modernize the way you're doing the updates if you're still using WSUS or Configuration Management. And you can do it, for example, through Azure Arc. So if you look at the capabilities of Configuration Manager, for example, as you can see on the screen, you have the OS patching, configuration, reporting, scripting, and software distribution. You can, for example, switch for the update management, for the OS patching of your servers to Azure Update Manager. So in a way, you no longer will use WSUS or Configuration Manager, but for the complete server OS patching, you switch to Azure Update Manager, and it doesn't matter if those servers are running in Azure or if they're running on premises or in any other cloud like AWS, it will work. So that's at least the idea Microsoft has to do it. I don't say it will work for everything, but it's, in my opinion, it will work for quite a lot of those things. So the question is, can we patch in a modern cloud way, especially if we look at our server OS patching? And then to make it a little bit funny, yes, indeed you can. So now probably your question is, how would we do it? Well, the Azure way, of course. Let me also start with the first try Microsoft did. It all started, you have WSUS. They tried to do it through Azure. And the first version they released to the public was Azure Automation Update Management. It was a combination of Azure Automation and a log analytics agent that need to be installed on the Azure VM or on the on-premises VM. So it worked. It was a first good try. You could even make different deployment schedules. So you could make deployment schedules based on tags, for example, for your Windows servers or even for your Linux servers. So in my example, I can only show a screenshot because this one in reality doesn't work anymore. But just to get started, you could base an update schedule on a specific tag. So if an Azure VM had a specific tag, that tag was added to the update schedule, and it just followed every schedule that was related to that tag. So if a VM had a specific tag and that tag was added to an update schedule, that VM will be updated following everything that was configured in that specific update schedule. It was the old thing. You can see, for example, how that tag was added on the previous screen in Azure Automation when you configured the update schedule, and now you see how that specific tag is added to a VM. That's it. So tag name and the thing you add to it, and the value, and those things need to be the same exactly how you configured it in the update schedule as on your VM, and you were good to go. Quite easy to do it. The only thing was Microsoft deprecated the log analytics agent. They did it officially on 31 of August 2024. So what followed was you couldn't use Azure Automation Update Manager anymore because it was dependent on that specific log analytic agent. So you had to do something else. Next to that, the V1 version, like I always like to call it, had some other limited capabilities. You could do that much related to scheduling. It was not that deep, so that you could configure everything with pre and post script. It was capable of doing it, but it was quite difficult to set it up. You also had to make different groups, so you couldn't use the same schedule on your Azure VMs as you would do on your on-premises VMs. So if you want to do both, you had to split them up and create different schedules. The most strange thing was it hadn't any on-demand capabilities. So if you wanted to run an update or check for updates, next to the schedule you had placed on a specific VM, you weren't capable of doing it. So you couldn't do, if there was a breach, for example, and there was a specific security update or a feature update you had to apply directly on specific VMs, you couldn't do it. So you had to adjust the update schedule to do a specific update directly, and so on and so on. So a lot of work instead of just clicking on a button and do it on demand. There wasn't also not that many role-based access control built around it. If you were a contributor, you could do everything. If you had access, you could configure everything. It's not that specific settings you could apply in the automation update management that you could set and specify only those specific groups are allowed to do it with the people inside of it. No, it wasn't there. It was quite limited, only focusing on log analytics mostly and on the RBAC roles you could apply on your Azure automation account. And like I already said, it was dependent on a log analytics agent. So when it got deprecated, you had to start using something else. And that's where Azure Update Manager came into place. It's the V2 version, like I always said. Officially it became GA on September 18, 2023. So already quite some time before the deprecation of the log analytics agent. Despite that, I still saw a lot of companies still using the old version instead of switching to the new version. I think they were thinking of if it's if it's not broken, don't fix it. In that kind of way of thinking, probably. But in my opinion, luckily with the deprecation, everybody started switching. And I think most important differences between the version 1 and the version 2. Now it's a complete SaaS service. So it's there. You almost don't need to configure it. Don't let me say it wrongfully. Now you can put one specific maintenance configuration on different subscriptions. So you don't need to pinpoint out every subscription with a different update schedule. No, you can do it on a multi-subscription. Most importantly, you don't require log analytics agents anymore. You can do quite a lot of scheduling. You can even split up different maintenance configuration windows, split up Defender updates before, for example, the definitions. You can do combinations of Linux and Windows VMs in one schedule. You can also split those up. You can even pinpoint out the reboot time and stuff like that. All those things we weren't able to do it in that same way and rich scheduling like you can do now. It's fully integrated with Azure Resource Graph, so it will keep everything monitored also through Azure Resource Graph. So you can use a lot of KQL queries if you're familiar with it to look things up, see which updates are installed, and yeah, it's quite nice. Next to that, it's not only focused on Windows Server OSs and Linux OSs, you can also do Microsoft application updates. So if you have SQL Server, you can also do the SQL Server updates and ESS updates and all those other things. Now, at the moment, it's only Microsoft application updates, but hopefully in some quick, not that far away time, Microsoft will also foresee third-party application updates, so that you can combine it in one product and that you don't need to use a separate product or Winget or whatsoever to also update the application running on top of your servers. For the Azure Arc enabled services, extension based. So it uses the Arc agent in combination with extensions. I will explain it more in depth at later slides and when I do my demo. For the Azure VMs, it's fully integrated. So the only thing it requires is the VM agent, and the extensions are hidden extensions. So it's fully integrated in the platform itself. So that's a big difference. If you look at an Arc VM or an Azure VM, on the Azure VM, you will only see that the VM agent is running inside your VM. If you look into the extension part, you don't see any extensions. If you look at an Arc-enabled VM, you will see Azure Connected Machine Agent installed inside the VM. And if you want to use Azure Update Manager, you also need to use 2 specific extensions for Windows and 2 specific extensions for Linux. But let me explain it more deeply later on. And now you have also all kind of capabilities to put RBAC even until the VM level, and who can do what and who can adjust the maintenance configuration we need, and so on and so on. So RBAC is now fully integrated into the Update Manager service. Most important, what kind of OSs can you update with Azure Update Manager? Well, all Windows OSs, going from 2008 R2 to everything new, Windows Server 2025. Windows 2008 R2, of course, isn't not supported anymore. Even through extended security updates, it's not there anymore, but it was able to do it. That's the only thing you need to remember about it. Next to that, it also supports all kind of Linux distros. Think of Red Hat, Ubuntu Pro, CentOS. Just remember that not every version of those distros will be supported. So where they support Windows OSs mostly all time and every version, with Linux, it's mostly the latest 3 distros they support from a specific one, and the other ones, most of the time they reach an end of service status after a year or a bit longer. It also supports all Azure images in the Azure Compute Gallery, all type of Azure VMs, and most importantly, also all Azure Arc-enabled servers, everything that's running outside of Azure and that's Arc-enabled. Doesn't matter if it's a Windows VM or a Linux VM, it works. But it also doesn't support any Windows x86, sorry, that was in Dutch, Windows Server OSs. So for the server OSs, like you can see on top, it only supports the x64 OSs, but it doesn't support x86 ones. It also doesn't support clients. So if you want to do updates for your Windows 11 VMs or whatsoever, it's not supported. If you then think a little bit further, it also doesn't support any AVD session nodes. It also doesn't do any driver updates. Hopefully within this any year it will do, but at the moment it's not supported. It also doesn't support Azure Kubernetes service nodes and virtual machine scale sets. They're also thinking of doing the scale sets. Everything is changing. It's also a service Microsoft is focusing quite hardly on, because they're also pushing Azure Arc these days, and Azure Update Manager is almost one of the first features you enable or you start using in combination with Azure Arc. That's how I see it mostly into at customer sites. So just remember that you can support almost all server OSs, quite a big bunch of Linux OSs. Just look at the supported Linux version of the distros you're running, and then everything Azure VM related and Arc enabled. How does it work? This is a high level one. Azure Update Manager is a SaaS service, so it's there by default. If it's a new Windows Azure VM, for example, or a Linux Azure VM, and you install it, doesn't matter if you do it through ClickUps, like Maik said, or you do it through infrastructure as code, or do it through, it doesn't matter if you use Biceps, Azure PowerShell, Azure CLI to deploy the VM. The VM guest agent, the guest agent is always in those newly deployed Azure VMs. That one talks to the Azure Update Manager extension. For an Azure VM, you don't see that specific extension, but it's fully integrated into the guest agent. That one talks to the Windows Update Client or Linux Package Manager. That's also inside that specific agent. And that one talks to the repository. For Linux, it can be a public or a private Linux repository. For Windows, it can talk to WSUS. If you're still running WSUS, you can even combine Azure Update Manager with WSUS. The Windows Update Client can also just communicate with the central one, the Microsoft Update or Windows Update. So it doesn't matter which repository you're using to do to get your patches from, it will probably work. Those are the default ones, but it will work. So I'm already a little bit further. And then those things talk to Azure Update Manager. Azure Update Manager logs everything in the Azure Resource Graph, and everything it does, it will also be stored in Azure Resource Graph. So in that way, you can even know which updates are being pulled and which updates are being installed, which updates didn't work and stuff like that. So through Azure Resource Graph, you have quite a lot of ways to look at how the whole process is working and which steps are not working, or which VM doesn't have the Arc agent and stuff like that. So everything is put away and managed in the back through Azure Resource Graph, and that's how it works. So on the Windows VM, let me pinpoint it out. This is all integrated in the VM agent, so you will not see the extension. On an Arc agent, you will see that you need to install the Azure Connected Machine agent. So you need to install the on-premises VM or the VM running in AWS through the Azure Connected Machine agent. You need to integrate it into Azure Arc, and then you need to install those specific extensions, which you will see on an Arc VM, and you're good to go. And then you just can pinpoint out to Microsoft Update, which is by default, or Windows Update, or you can let it get its update through WSUS, for example. You have the option. So for example, on this screen, the VM agent, for people who are not familiar with it, if you open a task manager in any Azure VM you deployed, or in any Azure Linux VM you deployed, but to make it visual, I selected a Windows VM, and you will see under processor that the Windows Azure Guest Agent is always running. The nice thing is, with the V1 version, you had to deploy the log analytics agent, an extra agent. With this one, you don't need an extra agent. That one is already there by default, and it will allow you to communicate with the OS to assist, to update to get the update status. Next to that, you can also trigger the update itself through it, and you can get the reporting back as a result of which updates are being deployed through the Azure Resource Graph, and all by the default agent, which is installed in any Azure VM. So not a lot of work over there for that one. The only thing is, it's not the date you need to save when the Terminators or AI will take over. No, it's another date. And it's not that far from now, September 2025, when Microsoft will retire the default outbound internet access for any of new deployed Azure VMs. So in that way, the Azure VMs won't be able to directly communicate through Windows Update, even if Azure Update Manager is installed. So traffic still needs to go out. But luckily, there are different ways to get this fixed or to handle this. So first of all, if you have Azure Firewall running in your environment, we will probably already configure it to let all egress traffic, also the one through Windows Update or Microsoft Update, to travel to that specific flow. So if you already have set it up in your environment in this way, you're good to go. You don't need to change anything else. If you're not using an Azure Firewall in your environment, or you're not using or you're not using an NVA, any other NVA, like a FortiGate, a Cisco firewall in your Azure environment, you can always add public IP address to your VM, but I think we all know, or we can all agree, that we'll not be doing that one, because that will open up a lot of stuff you don't want to open up to the internet. So that's definitely not a good way. But next to that, you also have these days the Azure NAT Gateway. So all VMs in a specific VNet for subnet of a specific VNet, you can combine it with the NAT Gateway, and the NAT Gateway allows you to still do all public traffic, everything that's egress traffic, everything that needs to go out, for example, to Windows Update. It will NAT it, so it will be hidden for everything that tries to get the source, for example, and that's a way to still get Windows updates through the internet to your Azure Update Manager and configured Azure VMs, for example. So first look at Azure Firewall to manage all the egress traffic, or otherwise, if you hopefully don't want to use any public IPs to still get that specific default outbound internet access related to it, you can still use the Azure NAT Gateway. That's something I definitely wanted to tell you, because I think a lot of people don't know this or didn't look at it. It's the same thing as the moment that the log analytics agent deprecated. Everybody was, yeah, we still have time. I think this is some kind of the same scenario. We still have some time, but to be honest, 30th of September is not that far away anymore. So if you have something set up in your environment with Azure VMs and Azure Update Manager, still try to configure the way the updates, how you can pull the updates and get those updates, that still works after that specific date, depending on how your environment in Azure is set up. Next to that, something that also a lot of people seem to forget, it's a SaaS service, and Microsoft always says it works by default. You don't need to configure anything for it. It's not completely true. You still require some resource providers. So if you onboard a new landing zone or a new subscription in your environment, by default, not everything related to Azure Update Manager will work. First of all, you should have the Microsoft Compute resource provider. That's the one that's required to manage everything related to Azure VMs or scale sets. If you also want to do the updates for Arc-enabled servers, you need a hybrid compute resource provider. That one handles everything related to Arc-enabled servers, for example. And quite an important one, if you want to do manage the updates to dynamic schedules and through maintenance configuration windows to specify into Azure, you also need a Microsoft Maintenance Resource Provider. All of them are not there by default. When you deploy your first Azure VM through ClickOps, the Microsoft Compute Resource Provider will be installed. So for a lot of people, probably that one will be already there. But the Microsoft Maintenance one is not a default one. So if you ever configure it and you try to add a dynamic scope, for example, to a maintenance configuration, it's not working, it's probably related to, especially if it's a new subscription, to missing that specific resource provider. So they need to be there. There also need to be some extra resource providers there, but these are the three most important ones you need to have. Then the next thing you need to do is configure a periodic assessment. What is a periodic assessment? Quite important. Simply said, it's a feature, like you can see on the screen, that enables automatic recurring checks for missing updates on machines. Simply said, it will poll your VMs and will see if there are updates missing. Doesn't matter if it's Windows or Linux. Doesn't matter if it's running in Arc, via Arc, or through single, or it's just an Azure VM. It will poll those and will see if there are any updates missing, and will inform the system in the back that there are specific updates missing on a specific VM, for example. By default, as you can see now on my screen, a periodic assessment is configured, like you can see, with yes on all those VMs and Arc-enabled servers. By default, it will be set to no. How can you configure this automatically so you don't need to set that specific setting for every VM you onboard or whatsoever? Quite simple. Configure it to Azure Policy. If you open Azure Update Manager, you can also directly see which Azure policies you need to use for it. For the periodic assessment, you'll at least need to configure periodic checking for missing updates on Azure virtual machines, on Azure Arc-enabled servers. There's only one thing you should remember. Let me see if I can switch to my Azure portal. If you go to Azure Policy, let me type it like this, policy. If I go to my definitions, I hope the screen is big enough for everybody. You can see I created initiative, policy initiative. That's the short abbreviation of my company name I'm using. Azure Update Manager and settings. If I click open that one, And I will click on Edit Initiative. I hope Azure is a little bit faster than when Maik was doing his demo. If I look into the policies that are part of this initiative, you will see all those 3 specific for the periodic assessment are there. Also to set specific settings for the recurring updates. Those top 3 are building ones. The only thing is, if you click open this one, you will see the OS type. By default value, it's set to Windows. It's a building one, so if you have Arc-enabled servers, but Linux ones, you will miss those. That's why you need to probably create, like I did, a custom policy based on that one and change the default value to Linux, just like I did in this one. And in that way, you're also able to pull those Arc-enabled Linux servers. So if you just leave it like this, like it's mostly set on the Microsoft Docs or Microsoft Learn, you will miss out all the Linux Arc-related servers. So all the ones I use, the policy is the building ones with a custom created one to get Azure Update Manager and the periodic assessments configured correctly, are these. So if you build exactly the same one like you now see on the screen, you're good to go. Just add it, if you could see it. Let me close this one. Oh, sorry, I clicked. If you look at the assignment, just put it on a specific height in your landing zones. I always add it to the landing zones where my Arc subscriptions are underneath, where my on-premises subscriptions are underneath, where I run also the subscriptions where I run my Azure VMs. So I just place that specific policy initiative on, assign it on a specific management group level, and everything underneath it, on any subscription underneath it, will get that specific policy and you're good to go. And then if you look at Azure Policy, for example, to Azure Update Manager, you will see if I click on the machines, let me open this one, that periodic assessment will switch from no to yes. Just also think that to apply that specific initiative, if you just create it, it can take up to 24 hours before the setting will be set. So that's one thing. Let me see if I can open my screen again. Let me switch. Okay. So that's how you configure the periodic assessment. Next to the periodic assessment, you also need to configure a maintenance configuration. And it's a way you define a custom maintenance window during which the updates are being, or the patches can be applied to Azure resources. Doesn't matter if it's an Arc VM or an Azure VM. Once again, in a maintenance configuration windows, you specify when updates can be applied. For example, every Thursday at 10 p.m. or every third Thursday and every fourth Thursday, for example. How long the maintenance window takes. So it can take 2 hours. By default setting by Microsoft is 3 hours and 55 minutes. But you can also play with those. You specify the scope. You do it through a dynamic scope. So which VMs or which Arc-enabled servers will get that specific maintenance configuration window. So you can also play around with that one. You can specify which updates need to be installed. So which classifications. Do I only want to security updates being installed? Do I also want to have the critical ones or a combination? Do I want to feature updates for Microsoft Defender, for example, for the MDM? You can also include or exclude specific updates. And you can even schedule and use one-time or recurring update deployment. So if you want to do a one-time update or a one-time polling of which updates are missing, you're now all capable of doing. How does it work, a dynamic scope? It's still subscription-based. So for every subscription where you want to use specific servers, or you want to add specific servers into Azure Update Manager, and in that specific maintenance configuration window, you specify it, and you can specify the specific VMs on different resource attributes. How I mostly do is also just like I did it in the version 1 based on tags. So for example, like you can see on the screen now, maintenance configuration windows, all are A for all types, so Windows VMs and Linux VMs, every third Thursday at 8 p.m. in the evening, and reboot if required. So I always try to make it human readable. I create a maintenance configuration for Defender, MCA daily, for example, or MCA Windows daily, for example. You can do it like that. Next to those tags, you can also specify the resource groups, the location, so only the VMs which have a location in West Europe or only the VMs in East US. You can specify the OS type, Windows, Linux, or you can even add custom properties. Here you can see an example how I do it with tags. So you can see that's an ARC-enabled VM, for example, and you can see I have a specific tag added to it, maintenance configuration, that specifies that specific maintenance configuration in which I configured into Azure Update Manager. So by that and adding that on the VMs required one, everything flows by itself. You can see, for example, I have 2 of them. I also have one for Defender. Why do I have different ones? You can see, for example, this maintenance configuration windows will go on every 3 weeks for specific critical updates and other updates, and the maintenance configuration for Defender, just the definitions for Defender will be deployed every day. So it runs every day and will deploy the next definitions and the latest definitions every day. So in the case of a breach, for example, it's related to Security Defender, of course, it's better to split it up from the other updates. Otherwise, the Defender updates will also be installed every month after every third Thursday, for example. But that's something you need to update and get on going every day, in my opinion. If you then look at associated schedule, for example, you can see, for example, for this specific VM that it has 2 maintenance configuration windows schedules configured to it. It has the one that does the normal updates, I would say, and it has the daily one for the daily Defender. For Azure VMs, if you then look at the patch orchestration, you will see they will have customer managed schedules. So the patch orchestration will switch from Azure managed, for example, to customer managed schedule. If they're showing for that specific VMs, it's customer managed schedule, that it means that you're using a maintenance configuration window. Sometimes, if you want to enable a machine through a dynamic scope, you will see something like this, for example. You configure it, you configure the tags, the resource group, the OS types, just like you can see over here for that specific subscription. And you see that some VMs are available to be onboarded, but others are not. Most of the time, this has to do with how the VM, for example, in Azure is deployed. By default, if you now through ClickOps will deploy a new Azure VM, it will enable hot patch. From the moment it's a Windows Server Azure Edition 2022, this will be the default setting. Next to that, the patch orchestration options will be set to Azure Orchestrator, which means Microsoft will do the updates for you. You're not capable anymore to do a custom schedule, which is required for the Azure Update Managed maintenance configuration. So whenever you deploy a new VM into Azure, if you do it the ClickOps way, try to disable hot patch if you want to use it. The thing is, you can only enable hot patch in combination with the Azure Orchestrated. So it's the strange thinking of Microsoft, I would guess. So first of all, disable hot patch and see that you can not use the Azure Orchestrated window. So my advice would be to do it through the deployments from now on, even if it's a VM, through Azure PowerShell or through infrastructure as code. And then you just need to set the patch mode to automatic by platform. The assessment mode also to automatic by platform, and the bypass platform safety checks on user schedule to true. If you set it like this, you're capable of using the custom schedules. Otherwise, you will probably need to do some troubleshooting, but let me show you. For example, if you look at this specific VM, you can see it has the patch orchestration Azure Managed Safe Deployment. It's an Azure VM, even though the specific Azure policy is applied, it should get into customer managed schedules. But because of this setting, because I created this one just through ClickUps, it's not capable of setting the setting differently. So that's why it's also showing a fix. So if you now, for example, click on that one, you can see this machine is scheduled associated to it. Please select the required patch orchestration. Luckily, you can simply change it. I will now do it through ClickUps. How can you change it? Just saying that specific patch window, for example. You can, for example, go over here. You can look at the scheduling, for example. You can see it has those specific tags to it. So it should normally work, but you need to click on the update settings, and you need to specify disable hot patch. That's the first thing. And then you can set the customer managed schedule. If you leave hot patch, for example, you're not capable of switching the patch orchestration because a requirement of hot patch is Azure managed. So just disable hot patch, and you can set it, and you can configure it. You can also do this through Azure policy and through remediation and stuff like that. But that's a thing. It's an error I see quite a lot being showing these days through Microsoft. It also takes some time before the Azure portal is aware of the change. So that's a way to fix it. If you now, for example, look at the maintenance configuration windows, you can see I have 3 of them configured. I have one every third Thursday at 8 p.m. Reboot if required, and I have another one on the 4th. So I can even split up if I have 5 domain controllers, 3 domain controllers in the first one and the other 2 in the other one, so that whenever an update fails, for example, I still have some VMs running that didn't get that update. So if you have, for example, Azure VMs running in a maintenance window, try to split it up between those different maintenance configurations. If I, for example, click open that one, you can see the schedule. You can edit the schedule. You can see that the next maintenance is planned on July 17, 30, and then the next one will be August 21, and the next one will be the 18th of September. Also see that it's in the correct time zone, because you guys, most of you will probably be in England. That's another time zone that I'm using. Also see at customers a lot of time that they wrongfully configure the time zone and the server started updating in a wrongfully window. You can see which updates you can exclude, include. You can adjust those. You can only include, for example, definition updates. In this one, I have the critical updates and the security updates. I didn't exclude or include anything else. And you can also specify dynamic scopes. Dynamic scopes until now still not work on management group level. So you need to specify them on the subscriptions level. So for every subscription, like I said, where you have a specific resource running, you need to specify it. So for example, if I look at my Infra 1 Arc subscription and I click on actions, you can see I filter it by, if I look at the resource group, the specific resource group holding my Azure Arc enabled servers. For the resource types, I only selected Azure Arc, location West Europe, OS type Windows and Linux, and most importantly, that specific tag name and value, maintenance configuration, MCA, and that's how you configure it. When you set it like this, you will directly see which VMs can be enabled in this way. If I now, for example, look at my management one, you will see that's an Azure VM. It's, for example, the resource type is differently, but the tag is exactly the same. So simply you can configure any subscription, and you can even change the type of resources you want to add. If you want to exclude specific resource group, you can even do it on that specific dynamic scope. If I look at Daily Defender, you can see this one only applies to Windows. So if I click open that one, go to dynamic scopes, like the infra one, for example, again, all the VIMs, Arc-enabled VIMs are capable of getting that one. And it's based on the maintenance configuration Defender, that specific value, only for Azure Arc. And instead of Windows and Linux, this one only focuses on Windows VIMs, because Linux and MDA still don't work. And then if you look at an Azure VM, for example, you will see that that specific setting, let me take another one. Let me take the domain controller. You can see that those specific tags are just applied, and it all works. That's how it is. Nicholas, is it okay that I just show the pricing and then we close up? Because I think I'm already talking for 40 minutes. Huh?
Yeah, that's fine. You can show the pricing.
Okay, let me show, because that's an important thing to show. Let me just switch this one. Okay, let me go to this one. Pricing. For Azure VMs, it's completely free. That's a nice thing. So if you're running Azure VMs and you want to use Azure Update Manager, you can completely use it for free. Doesn't matter if it's Windows or Linux, you're good to go. Next to that, for an Arc-enabled server, it's a little bit different. You pay around €4.5 for every server each month. I put it in euros. It will be almost the same in dollars and stuff like that, or in pounds, I think. I don't need the exact recalculation of it. But there's a little bit different. If you, for example, for the servers and for that specific subscription where your Azure VMs or Arc-enabled VMs are running, have enabled Microsoft Defender for Cloud Service Plan 2, its Azure Update Manager will be free. So if you have the Defender Plan 2 running, you don't need to pay that €4. You just pay that $15, around €15 for the server, but then for the complete Microsoft Defender for Cloud plan, and Azure Update Manager is a part of it. So we don't need to pay separately for it. But then you're already paying €15, of course, almost €15 for each VM in that specific subscription. And even Microsoft even made it more complex these days. On every Arc-enabled server, you can also now enable the Azure benefits. So if all those on-premise servers that are Arc-enabled are covered by software assurance, active software assurance, you can set that specific checkbox. You can add it to your settings. And what does it mean? Next to it, Azure Update Manager also gets free for everything for those Arc-related servers. It's not only Azure Update Manager, it's also change tracking and inventory managing. So a lot of Arc capabilities where you normally need to pay a specific amount of money for. If you enable those Azure benefits, those things will get free also. So that's another option. The only thing, of course, is that you need to have software assurance for those things. And to even make it more complex, I will go a slide back. You can also enable pay-as-you-go, for example. So if you no longer want to license your on-premise servers, which are Arc-enabled through your normal licensing way, you can also enable pay-as-you-go for that specific Arc-enabled server. And if you do that, you pay a specific amount of money. I think it's around €30 each month to license that specific server through your Azure subscription. So the licensing will be Azure subscription based on a monthly base. And if you do it, the licensing in that way, Azure Update Manager will also become for free. It's the same thing as you would have software assurance and you enable the Azure benefits. if you do the billing and the licensing for that specific service that's Arc enabled through the pay-as-you-go, all those things will also get for free. So depending on how the licensing works and which things you have enabled, pricing will be different if you want to use Azure Update Manager. So it's an important thing to look into. To close off, and then I will let the answer going. I can still talk for a few hours. I still have quite a lot, but we will close with this. In my opinion, what we're still missing in Azure Update Manager doesn't say that Microsoft is not already working on it in some way, is third-party or application level patching. Like I said, you can do the SQL updates and the ESS updates. You can also do it and integrate those into IOM, but pure third-party patches are not there yet. And next to that, if you deploy a specific update, doesn't matter if it's a Linux or Windows VM, and that update fails or it's a bad update, there is at the moment still no way to do a rollback. So in WSUS, for example, you were capable of that update is not good, roll it back and it's gone, and we wait until the fix of that update and then we deploy it again. The rolling back is still not integrated in the Azure IOM platform. There's still some other things missing, but the most top important ones that hopefully Microsoft will add to IOM quite in the near future, I hope it's these two, because that's a question I get a lot from customers. Yeah, we're still missing a few things. We also want to do third-party patching, because now we need to use Winget or something like the stuff from Patch My PC, what they don't want to do on the server and stuff like that. But yeah, so hopefully Microsoft will get this into the system also in service. And with that being said, I'm totally not at the end of my session, but if you have any questions, I would love to answer them. You can also look at my blog. I blog a lot about these things. So also the stuff I see failing at customer sites, or the things I see wrongfully configured or whatsoever. Is it through policy? Is it through the maintenance configuration windows they apply? Yeah, I see quite a lot of things. And everybody is silent, so I talked them asleep, I think.
No, I think it's perfect. I mean, no one got any question.
Or it's all clear now.
Yeah, I think that's quite good when you use dynamic groups on it, because, and then you just
especially in combination with those tags.
Yeah, with tags, like when you can
and
shut
then
down
human readable tags, so you can already read the window in the maintenance configuration window just by looking at the tag.
Okay, yeah, that's why you need good naming convention.
Yeah,
and then you can just read it from that.
I wasn't going to say that one, but governance is quite important if you start configuring this. That's my opinion. Because it will, for me, all those things are scripted. So I just ask at the customer how you want to have everything configured. Do you have something you're doing now on premises? Do I need just to rebuild it? So you can use the same things and the same ID into Azure and the same maintenance windows, for example, you're now using in WSUS. And then I try to rebuild them into a maintenance configuration. That's how it works, in my opinion.
Oh, you mean clone one VM and then use it for another configurer?
Yeah, I asked how are you doing the updates now, and which windows do you have, and do you have separated windows and stuff like that. So an important part of this is knowing what people are already doing.
Yeah.
See if you can optimize it and rebuild it. But the design, it's not just it's there and it works. Yeah, Microsoft does say that quite a lot. Just click, and it works. But it's the same thing with Arc. Those I didn't show it because my time was up. But with Arc, it requires specific extensions. But when I now do a deployment at customers and I onboard them, onboard specific service into Arc, I already configure the connected machine agents with specific settings. You can configure quite a lot of them. So I have extension allow lists that only allow specific extensions. So the extensions related to Azure Update Manager, I can already block them or I can allow them. But if you block them and people are not aware of it, Azure Update Manager will not work. Because that specific extension can't get deployed, which you don't need to do in an Azure VM, but you need to do it with an Arc-enabled VM. So things can go wrong quite fast.
Yeah, it's lots to consider on-prem.
So you saw quite a lot of errors in my environments. I also had some updates with no update data found. That's, for example, where I blocked the Arc VM to get that specific extension being used just by the allow list. But that's things that I see at customer sites quite a lot. So it's working on these 50 VMs. Doesn't matter where they're running, but it doesn't work on these 30. Can you troubleshoot? And that's things I see quite a lot. Hotfixes enabled in combination with that Azure window instead of that Azure safety window instead of using a custom window. And yeah, so how bigger the environment, how more of those issues you will see pop up.
Have you tried to automate this, like patches and stuff, and it does work, like everything?
Yeah. That's I said. I just asked the customer. I have most of the time a workshop or something, few hours or longer or half a day, and I see what they already have. See if they have another idea how to configure it now. Do they want to split up things? Also, just by talking to them, what's now capable and how you can change it, and what's not possible at the moment, you probably will get somewhere. And then I just configure it and deploy it.
Okay. But I
guess I can push out the tags, I can push out the maintenance configuration windows, and for me, it doesn't matter if it's through Bicep or through Azure PowerShell. If the customer is more familiar with PowerShell because it's more an on-premise customer, then I do it in that way. Because PowerShell is something a lot of server admins or the older server admins know, and they're not that capable with Biceps or Armdies or Terraform or whatsoever. It all depends on how the customer sees it, and then it's the small things that can get things set up correctly or set up wrongfully.
Yeah, but I think for Linux, it's only like hot patches, certain updates you can deploy to it.
Yeah, but I see quite a lot of Linux VMs being also wrongfully configured in some way.
You mean what do you mean by wrongly configured? As in
that they didn't configure the maintenance configuration window correctly, that they added things they shouldn't add on Linux VMs, and then things get into a messy situation, and then you see something like 69 updates just hanging there but not doing anything. That's something I see quite a lot.
Okay, that's interesting.
Sometimes it's also because things can't get installed through the root because the settings on Linux are not correctly configured and stuff like that. It's not that easy setting it up on the different Linux distros as setting it up on Windows. In Windows, most of the time it will work, especially on Azure VMs. The only thing that can be wrongfully configured there is if you start using hotfix, it's not combinable with the custom schedule. That's it. So you need to disable it and stuff like that. But it also depends on how your Azure VM is deployed. If you add that specific part of code to your code, if it's PowerShell, Azure PowerShell or CLI, it will work because then the settings won't be set to Azure safe deployment in that specific window Microsoft uses. And then you're able to set all the settings through Azure policy. But even Azure policy, even if it has a remediation task to set those specific settings, is not capable to change that specific setting. That's the strange thing. So if you enable click hotfix in that Azure, you can set a policy, and the policy won't do anything at the moment. So that's things that Microsoft changes in the back that will block some things also. So
Yeah.
it
I
all
think
depends on.
you can probably do like a policy on to only allow certain distro, like only allow Ubuntu certain versions.
That's
So
the
you
thing
can
you can
allow,
also do. Yeah, you can.
yeah, to only allow
With a
that updates.
policy, if it's not a built-in one, you can write it yourself, or you can make a custom
Yeah.
one. Just like I did for the Linux, it's a built-in policy. The only thing is the built-in policy only focuses on Windows. But
Okay.
when you're missing all the Linux Arc-enabled VMs, so that's why
Yeah.
you just clone that one and you set the OS type to default to Linux. That's how I fix it. But it's strange because for the Azure VMs it's Windows and Linux, but for the Arc enabled it's only Windows. So sometimes probably
So
because
there's
it's a specific version of that built-in one or something. But
so if someone have like a Linux on-prem, it won't work, the updates?
The periodic assessment won't be set automatically to yes through the policy if you don't configure that custom one like I did. You can also still do it manually, eh?
Yeah.
But that's not how I would do it. For me, it's a server needs to be when a new server needs to be built. Doesn't matter if it's or you're onboarded to Azure Arc. All the settings for Azure Update Manager should be set automatically. So the tag should be there. The periodic assessment should be enabled. He need to follow a specific maintenance configuration window in that specific dynamic scope. Once it's set and once I set it up, all should go automatically. And I never want to touch it anymore.
Yeah.
But then you need to set up it correctly. And that's the thing I see not being done good quite a lot of times, to be honest.
Okay. But I guess you're just following the documentation, like how it's set up. And you just, if you install it, it will just be like with the extension and everything.
It's not. Let me phrase it in a secure way. It's the Microsoft Learn pages are missing some parts here and there, or that's for a lot of things. You will probably get it to work, but you need to think and think a little bit for yourself also. And in its the things I see is if it's Azure DevOps people deploying it. Don't understand me wrongfully, but they're sometimes missing the skill sets of how things were done on premises.
Oh yeah.
And this is, in my opinion, a combination of skill sets. You need to have a broader server skill set in combination with an Azure DevOps and an Azure Cloud Admin skill set. So it's a mix of skill sets.
In some cases, you can just work with the clients on-prem to help because the client probably have a sysadmin.
Yeah, that's why. I have those things. I've been a server admin for quite older, so.
Okay, no worries.
So I can think both ways. So for me, it's quite logical to do these things because I understand the server admins, but also I understand the cloud admins.
Yeah, make sure both.
I can talk to them together and see where we get. But it's useful in these kind of situations where you need to do anything Arc related or UAM related to on-premises stuff. And I even understand the AWS stuff, so I can even integrate those things. So
that's fine because it's multi-cloud Arc anyway, so it's okay.
Yeah, I see the bigger customers all have multi-cloud these days, but they also want to have their AWS VMs onboarded into Arc because they want to use that single pane of glass, and everything needs to be the same. So you can do it these days, but it's an extra skill set you need to add on top of your other skill sets. So
yeah, it's too much. Next will be Google. That's fine. Okay, no worries.
That's one I will probably skip, I think.
yeah, it's not popular enough.
So if anybody has a question, Nicholas, they can just ping me.
Yeah, no worries.
Just like I said, I did this kind of sessions. Normally, I do it for a live public. So to do it for a online public, I changed the slides a little bit. So yeah, but I can talk about it for hours and hours and hours and hours. But yeah.
Yeah, no worries. Any question, just ping him, or you can just check out his blog post.
Yeah, if they have a problem, they can just ping me and just ask. Yeah, I would love to help.
Okay. No worries. Thanks for joining, Wim. It's
Thank
amazing.
you for inviting me.
No worries. Hope everyone learned some Azure Update Manager and configure it properly at work. That's an important thing with Arc. Okay, see ya.